Hello everyone, and welcome to this segment of Code Rhetoric with Tam Talk. Today we will be focusing on acute and chronic conditions. The guideline is located in Section 1 under letter B and number 8 under your ICD-10-CM coding guidelines. The acute and chronic conditions guideline states, if the same condition is described as both acute or subacute and chronic, and separate sub-entries exist in the alphabetic index at the same indentation level, we are to code both codes and sequence the acute or subacute code first. So in our first coding example, the patient is diagnosed as having acute on chronic bronchitis. So in our first book steps, we're going to locate our main term, which is bronchitis. Then we're going to drill down to locate the indentation of acute or subacute, again, which describes the type of bronchitis the patient has. So hopefully when we follow these book steps, it should land us to our ICD-10 code J20.9. Again, the patient is also diagnosed with chronic bronchitis. So we're going to follow the similar book steps, but in this time we're actually going to go to chronic instead of acute or subacute. And hopefully our ICD-10 code should be J42. So our rationale for this coding example is, again, the patient was diagnosed with acute as well as chronic bronchitis or acute on chronic bronchitis. And so per our ICD-10 coding guidelines, the acute or subacute should be our first listed diagnosis code, and chronic should be listed as our secondary diagnosis code. Therefore, our coding should be listed as J20.9 and J42 as our secondary diagnosis. So in our second coding example, the patient is diagnosed with acute and chronic tonsillitis. So in our book steps, we're going to identify or locate our main term, which is tonsillitis. And again, acute and chronic describes the type of tonsillitis the patient has. So again, we're going back to our first book step. We're going to locate tonsillitis, and then we're going to look or drill down for our indentation of acute or subacute. And hopefully by doing so, our ICD-10 code should be J03.90. So in our second book step, again, we're going to locate our main term, which is tonsillitis, and look for our indentation of chronic. And hopefully by following these book steps, that should land us again on ICD-10 code J35.01. So our rationale for this coding example is, again, the patient was diagnosed with acute as well as chronic tonsillitis. And again, referring or referencing our ICD-10 coding guidelines, the acute or subacute should be our first listed diagnosis, and the chronic should be listed as our secondary diagnosis. Therefore, our coding should be listed as J03.90 and J35.01. So in our coding tips for this segment, number one, always pay close attention to how the condition or status is documented, listed, or ordered. Always remember that A comes before C, acute before chronic. Remember to always code to the highest specificity. And again, when in doubt, always reference your coding guidelines. This concludes my segment on acute and chronic conditions. To learn more about ICD-10-CM coding, please subscribe to our channel. And thank you for joining us.